The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to our second part of our Saturn and Capricorn series. As you can see on your screen, yes, we're going to look at transiting Saturn and Capricorn through houses 1 through 4. As you see on your screen, Saturn will be in Capricorn December 19th, 2017 through December 16th, 2020. Before we get started, first of all, have you muted yourself, Leroy? I'm getting feedback on my own voice.
I'm sorry. Here I go.
Thank you. Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts by Leroy and myself, Media Monk and Star Lady. You can subscribe to our Astral Library 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. This is where all of our educational and forecasting materials eventually end up in one of these 3 different sections. And of course, you can study our Evolutionary Astrology course with us. We have 3 different segments. And right now, through the end of December, you can save 25% by entering coupon code Capricorn at checkout. How's that for a few C's? The materials only is 25% off. The digital is not on sale. Or if you want materials and digital, both of them, that's 25% off. Any questions on that, just contact us on the information right here that you see on the bottom of this slide. So here's Saturn in Capricorn. And during that 3-year process, it's actually going to dip into Aquarius for about 3 months before it retrograde into Capricorn for a final time. However, it does create Saturn in Capricorn for almost 3 years. This is the sign of Saturn's rulership. Saturn rules the sign Capricorn. It rules the natural 10th house. So Saturn moving into its own sign is actually creating a new cycle, a new 28, 29-year cycle on its own in the generic zodiac. However, relative to the fact that it's balsamic to Pluto, it's finishing up some old soul cycles. Jupiter balsamic to Saturn, all 3 of them having their conjunctions there. There is a mixture of old cycles ending, new cycles beginning. Here is an ingress chart for Saturn moving into Capricorn December 19th, 2017. I put it for Rapid City because that's where Leroy and I are located. 9:49 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I use Aries houses because then we have everything in its natural sign, natural houses, and you get a generic chart of looking at how things are. And so right here you can see Saturn, balsamic, Pluto, Jupiter, balsamic, Saturn. Almost. It's going to go through waning semi-squares to Saturn. More information on that. Again, the first part of this series was Saturn in Capricorn with the archetypes, and then Saturn in Capricorn with all of the cycles. And so you can refer to that first part, which I would highly recommend to get the basics because it now builds upon moving through these 12 houses. Here is the same chart, taking out the inner planets. I left in the nodal axis of the moon because that's going to be going into Capricorn, moving backwards, south node. They're going to congregate. That's my word. I'll show you on the individual house charts. But what I wanted to point out, we've been saying this for a while in astrology, or is in second half of Saturn, Pluto, Uranus. Pluto, so our conscious planets, Jupiter and Saturn, are all in the waning half of their cycles to each of these 4 outer planetary archetypes. And I'm including Chiron as a dwarf planet, Pluto, dwarf planet. I'm including them as planets, okay? astrology, we work with observe, correlate, and we've been working with these planets long enough that you can get fussy about what you call them. I'm not going to be, as you probably have figured out, I'm kind of a philosophical astrologer. So here is just a recap for you on basics of what we worked with the Saturn in Capricorn archetypes. I really broke down how we look at the structure of individuated consciousness through Capricorn and Saturn. So this, all of this, being the structure of the individuated consciousness, is the foundation that transiting Pluto in Capricorn is going to evolve. Pluto in Capricorn is doing the same thing, and Jupiter, when it gets into Capricorn, will add on to it. We're not going to go in this in detail. I refer you to the first webinar in this entire 5-part series, but it's natal Saturn, planets in the 10th house, planets in Capricorn, whatever signs on the 10th house, and of course all their rulers, aspects, etc. You will have this to reference as we go along. I would say that wherever your transiting house is for Saturn in Capricorn, you also go back and look at your natal Saturn archetype. Follow this procedure right here. Make some bullet point notes on your own chart of what you understand with natal Saturn, house sign aspect, planets in the 10th house, whatever signs, aspects they make, etc. Take some time over this winter and really review this natally. And that's going to create your personal foundation again to then add on to what we're going to look at the next 3 webinars. Both Saturn and Capricorn, same archetype, passive polarity, cardinal modality, earth element. Again, structure of individuated consciousness. We went through all of these in detail the first class. Every other planet, be it a conscious planet, the personal inner planets, or the unconscious planets, Chiron, Uranus outward, all of them become filtered through Saturn. Because if you just think about it, we're all living in our conscious world. Even though we know some things are semi-conscious, subconscious, even though we have a lot of unconscious stuff right to the surface, we're still always trying to put it together into a cohesive unit so we're not insane. We do this through Saturn and the formula that I just gave you. Now, if you were born with natal Saturn retrograde, you have the door to those unconscious planets thrown wide open. When Saturn goes retrograde by transits, we all have that door to the unconsciousness wide open. Natal Saturn going retrograde by progression will do the same thing. This archetype relates to all of the conditioning factors that we have in our life. Familial, social, religious, racial is included in social, resources. Those are what I call those environmental conditionings. We also create judgments via these environmental conditionings with how we are conditioned to believe that any issue or subject has a standard of right, wrong conduct. And if we deviate from that right, wrong conduct, we are made to feel conditioned guilt. Saturn in Capricorn is that maturation process relative to all of these environmental conditionings. It is self-responsibility, self-determination, self-discipline. And all of those together will add up into what is more commonly known with Saturn in Capricorn as our career. Specifically our career maturation process, how we progress in our career, how we build up a career, how a career allows us to accumulate those resources and manage them. Saturn in Capricorn also has to do with authority, social positions of leadership, power, and control. So Saturn in Capricorn is outer security in all its many forms. How we make sense of that outward world and try to control it in order to feel secure. It is the boundaries of space-time or linear time with all of the related mortality issues. It is gender and hormonal issues, as well as childhood and parenting issues. It is the principles of involution, compression, and depression when our outer reality and circumstances no longer serve our soul. It is also the inner acceptance of ourself, regardless of whatever our outer roles or circumstances are in our life. Here is when Saturn will be retrograde. You can see that it's going to have 3 retrograde cycles, once each year, 2018, 19, 2020. 9 to 2 degrees Capricorn, 21 to 14 degrees Capricorn, and 2 Aquarius back to 25 Capricorn. Whenever Saturn is retrograde, it is going to be opening the door to the unconsciousness again, and it's going to be pointing towards the opposite sign, Cancer. And so part of Saturn's transit through Capricorn, with an emphasis during retrogrades, is also the archetype of Cancer. Basically, it's about replacing all that outer security we want to control, which we never can, with inner security. And this will include the recognition that accumulating resources or the inability to doesn't equate with security. You can have buku bucks and be as insecure as our current president of the United States is. You can have minimal resources and be completely inwardly, outwardly happy. It starts with the inner security and inner emotional self-reliance. It creates emotional shocks when Saturn's retrograde pointing towards Cancer to force reality wake-up calls. In other words, again, throwing off outer positions, outer circumstances, outer securities, having us go inward to create a self-image that is not dependent upon career or social position or resources, if we want to include them as well. These emotional shocks then provide an opportunity to create self-determination. And along with a positive self-image, we can rebirth or evolve however we are supposed to move career and work forward. It also is a cyclic reflection on the internal dynamics that are going on inside us that create self-image, reality, security, career, individual authority. So you can see Saturn retrograde in Capricorn with a polarity point towards Cancer. Everything in the outer world gets thrown inward upon ourselves. And we've got to go in and reflect on it to be able to come out and recreate our outer world better yet. Here are the conjunctions of Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto to each other. You can see them on your screen. Saturn has 1 conjunction to Pluto. Jupiter has 1 conjunction to Saturn. Right here, right here. Jupiter has 3 conjunctions to Pluto. This congregation, as these planets get closer and closer to 2020, in general, is going to continue to have our outer worlds crumbling in some way, calling us inward to that Cancer polarity. Can you find your inner peace and center and self-reliance, regardless of the craziness going on in the world around you, personally and collectively? That's going to be the point of these 3 getting closer and closer together. And then to take charge on an individual basis of going forward in our own world, regardless of the chaos around us. Here are the Jupiter ingresses. Jupiter, as we know, just went into Scorpio. Many of us are familiar with all of the sexuality issues, mainly the abuse thereof in the news in the last month or two. Jupiter is going to go into its own sign of Sag, November 8th, 18. Goes into Capricorn early December 2019. And here is Saturn in Aquarius, Jupiter in Aquarius, followed by the conjunction of the two just days after they go into Aquarius together. There's hope right here. We're going to crumble a lot of Capricornian old crystallized worlds, but we got a lot of Aquarius following afterwards. Yahoo, thank you. Now, just in case you're not aware of this, the Jupiter-Saturn cycles run in 20-year cycles. The last 200 years, they've been going pretty much in Earth. Our one in 2000 was in Taurus. They are going to shift now into the air element, which is Aquarius, Libra, Gemini for the next approximately 200 years. I think we're going to see a lot of that industrial age work and career of the last 200 years be replaced by air, technology, and service and communications over the next 200 years. Robots are going to do a lot more for us in mind-boggling speeds. So here, and again, I did the same thing with all these charts through all their houses. I just picked a date, and I picked the date that Saturn conjuncts the South Node, which is more or less July 3rd, 2019, which, by the way, even though I'm not showing it, the day before was a solar eclipse of Sun and Moon in Cancer, I think at about 13, 14 degrees. But I just wanted to include the slower moving planets so that we weren't all distracted by the faster moving planets. And the only thing I'm trying to show here on a generic basis as we go through all 12 houses is Saturn, balsamic to Pluto, closer, closer, South Node coming into this picture and activating this review of all these structures as Jupiter goes from Scorpio to Sag to Capricorn, and again does its conjunction to Uranus and Pluto in 2020. So in the first house, the structure of consciousness is going to require us to see ourselves in a new way. First house energy. We're going to be rebirthing our sense of self, first house, our relationships, seventh house polarity, and all the roles that we have in our world, and especially in our outer world. So when Saturn in Capricorn is transiting that first house, again, rebirthing self-responsibility and self-discipline. Old patterns are no longer working. And it's either going to require us to do more or less depending upon our past efforts. So as Saturn has been transiting in Sagittarius in the 12th house for this signature, how well have you stepped up to the plate and made an effort to take care of your stuff? If you have, it'll be a smoother transition with Saturn over that ascended and moving through that first house. If you did 12th house avoidances, then it may require you to really step it up when Saturn goes into the first house. It's also going to depend upon your age. Someone who has Saturn transiting Capricorn at 24 needs to get their act together. If you are Kim Marie and Saturn's going to go over your ascendant in 61, 62, it's like, oh, do I get to slow down a little bit? I've been doing hog chores. I started out doing hog chores as about 8, 9 years old on a farm. I've done my Capricornian work. So there's going to be individual environmental conditionings to take into account here. Through all of it, We want to address the responsibilities we personally have in such a way that it creates that first house freedom. You know that cliche, work smarter, not harder? That's the opportunity here. In many cases, and this can sometimes be age sensitive, but not always. There can be new career opportunities on the horizon. First house, new beginnings, rebirthing. There can be new social positions. Maybe there's been enough prior life efforts that regardless of your chronological age, you get to step up to the plate, or you're asked to, in regards to being some type of leader. Or perhaps you have some entrepreneur ideas. You want to create your own business. You want to move forward in that way. All depends. Of course, included in this could be retirement. There has to be a self-acceptance. I am who I am. This is my world. This is how I operate. These are the conditioning factors in my world that I'm changing. These are the ones that I can't change. I can't snap my fingers and turn from 62 to 22. So you have to have an acceptance of yourself regardless of what's going out there in the world. Because first house is self-acceptance. There can easily be all kinds of new roles in familial situations. Capricorn, Cancer, this is going to find its way operating through all 12 houses. When it's in the first house, there might be a need to stand up. Capricorn, take charge. There might be a need to let go or break free from conditioning factors in your family environment. All the way through transiting Saturn in Capricorn, there can be situations where you might be of the age where you have to take care of your parents, or you may have your parents cross over. You may be of the age where your children, your adult children, are evolving into you releasing certain roles and them taking on the roles. Again, this would be age orientated. It'll be relative to personal circumstances. The overly responsible have to know when to hold healthy boundaries. The under responsible have to step up to the plate. There's going to be a strong recognizing of time and mortality related issues when Saturn in Cap transits through the first house. The first house in health and wellness astrology, you know, head to toe, that first house is the body in general. And so again, just as I said, taking care of parents, children, taking care of you, included in this, regardless of age, is going to be a recognition of what your physical body can and cannot do. One of the things you might have to be most careful of with transiting Saturn Cap in the first is head injuries or headaches or brain injuries or dementia, you know, the brain just not working as well as it used to. Part of those mortality issues with the body. We want to be able to honor the need for those inner reflections, that involution that Capricorn will bring. That's how you're going to understand what needs to be changed in your life and your routines. What can happen with this first house transit is there's going to be cycles of exuberance and that fiery energy of I'm going to do this, do that, and get it all done, and go there and do this, and you know that superhuman effect with cycles of insecurity. Oh my gosh, there's so much responsibility in the world. How am I supposed to take it on in my life? So we'll go back and forth between that overconfidence and the inner security. The more we can honor that inner reflection, the more that it will allow us to have a little bit of intuition on what is best for each of us to initiate and follow through on. This is the opposite of that typical first house act, react, and you learn through the reactions to the action. Let's have a little maturity with this transit and again, honor some of that intuition there that we all have so we don't have to have as many upsetting reactions as possible. So we can minimize the upsetting reactions as much as possible. It's going to require us to make time for emotional interactions, 7th house polarity point, with whoever we're in close relationship with. When we have Capricorn on the ascendant in the 1st house, we have Cancer on the descendant in the 7th house. And so we want to be able to honor those inner emotional needs with ourselves and with our relationships. And sometimes what can happen with the Capricorn in the 1st is our instinctive approach to everything is a business deal, including our relationships. And when we act that way, the partner can have an emotional reaction to us and we're like, oh crap, I was acting like the biatch again and, hard to the core rather than recognizing there could be a lot of inner emotional stuff flowing back and forth. Can I take time to slow down and actually listen to that, honor that, feel that, discuss that with whoever I'm in relationship with, partner, family, children, close friends, etc. Now, I don't know if I can make a complete and utter list as we go through all 12 houses, so I tried to just do some bullet points and basics of what came through to me on an intuitive level. And so, by all means, you've got your little hit list to refer to. I do have a slide here where I just bullet pointed again a sentence or two. As Saturn in Capricorn gets to that conjunction to Pluto in the 1st house, it's going to create an intensification of whatever the old patterns are that need to be released and what the new needs are being reborn, what new patterns need to be initiated. Because again, 1st house, there's a death and rebirth of patterns going on, and including a death and rebirth on a literal basis as well. One of the biggest things to realize with Saturn-Pluto conjunctions is ultimate responsibility, ultimate self-responsibility when this conjunction is taking place in the 1st house. Now, Jupiter each year is going to be going through a sign of the zodiac as Saturn spends 3 years in Capricorn. Jupiter Scorpio on the 11th is going to be about getting to objectivity. Objectivity with relationships, Scorpio. Objectivity with resources, Scorpio. Objectivity with whatever comes up in our world on deep emotional levels. When Jupiter goes into Sag in the 12th house, 2019, we need to make time to surrender and honor our spiritual needs in the midst of any of those 1st house Saturn, Pluto responsibilities that are going on. And then when Jupiter goes into Capricorn in that 1st house and joins Saturn and Pluto there is a potential for freedom from all of the self-overload of responsibilities and efforts. Again, it's all about working smarter, not harder, as all of those planets congregate into that 1st house you can carry work smarter, not harder, all the way through the zodiac if you want to. Just say, how do I apply that to XYZ, whichever house it is. Now, I will continue to do, I just did a series on Jupiter and Scorpio, a two-part series. That's available on our website, evolutionaryastrology.net. You look for forecasting webinars, and you can find that two-part series and catch up on Jupiter and Scorpio if you want to. I'll continue to do individual webinars on Jupiter and Sag and Capricorn as the time comes up. But so here's just that, again, little bullet pointing for you over the next few years as we're working our way through these transits. Anytime you have questions, if there's something that I didn't quite address as we're doing one of the Pluto house transits, you're more than welcome to type it into the Q&A chat board with Leroy. He'll either answer the question from the board, or he is welcome to interrupt me, and I will address it as much as I can. When transiting South Node conjuncts all of these outer planets, and most of that is going to be through 2019. The nodes go into Cancer, Capricorn, November 6th, 2018. So we will see South Node of Capricorn conjunct Pluto, then Saturn, then Jupiter as we move through 2019. This is more on this in that second webinar that I did, Saturn and Capricorn through the cycles. As it interacts, South Node of the Moon in Capricorn, and it interacts with each of these three outer planets, it is going to emphasize on emotional levels what are the old patterns you need to release, old conditioning patterns, old judgments, right, wrong conduct, old guilt, old career stuff. It's just going to intensify the release of these Saturn in Cap, Cancer polarity key phrases we looked at the beginning of class. As we then look at Saturn in Capricorn transiting through the second house, again, same date, different time period. All I've done is arrange the time period. So when we have a visual, we start to see these planets coming together in Capricorn in the house that we are actually looking at. It's because I put whole houses in. I made everything start with 0, so it would naturally fall into that natural house shared by the sign. The structure of consciousness here is rebirthing one's relationship with resources and recognizing a deep inner security, regardless of your outer resources, abundance or lack, and regardless of any outer situations. Here is that Taurus house of inner security. And that's what's going to be triggered to be rebirthed through these three planets and the South Node. So here's where we're going to have resource re-evaluations in all its form. How do we create resources? And by resources, I use this term because I don't mean just money. I mean all the stuff we accumulate. In our westernized world, we accumulate most likely many times a vehicle. We accumulate a house. We can accumulate material possessions in our world. Our library of books, our iPad, our TV, our Christmas decorations, whatever it may be. So we're going to evaluate what we want to create. Taurus, the second house, it's fixed earth. This is how we accumulate resources. It's the first of the earth houses. We're going to review all of that. And we're going to be looking at what is important to us from that perspective. What do I want to put my energy into creating? What do I want to accumulate? Would I rather have the material creature comforts, or would I rather have a certain amount of money in the bank? We reevaluate the releasing of resources as well. They're both, well, they're all three going to be going on. There's going to be a material ebb and flow when Saturn in Capricorn moves through the second house. As you can see on your screen here, it's double Earth. It's the physical. In this reevaluation, what we have to recognize, here again, our sense of security does not come from the material world. Now, for the souls in the consensus state with this transit, it's going to be a pretty tough thing if the partner asks for a divorce and they want to take half of your stuff, or you lose your job. Because in consensus, that's 7 out of 10 with the cowbell around their neck who follow the lead cow, who follow the consensus society, you know, it's that outer world that gives them security. So they may feel that swing of ups and downs more than someone who's individuating or spirituating states of consciousness. That's going to be more orientated towards, I am not my stuff. So the resource values are going to be changing all over the place. And we either have the inner ability to recognize what we need to initiate a rebirth, or we can have it forced upon us. Again, not that any of us wish this upon anybody, but if you look at the state of California, for instance, with the wildfires, how many people are going to wake up tomorrow without a home? If you look at the hurricanes that we had this summer in Texas and in Puerto Rico, how many people still have no place to have a roof over their head? There's broad collective cycles of this that are going to be going on in addition to just this transiting house signature. So if resources are removed, it throws us inward. And it basically throws us inward to have us recognize we are our own resource. And on the ultimate spiritual terms, universal source is the ultimate resource. This or something better. Can I release it and recreate it? And if I want to, create it better yet. But can I release it and still be okay within myself? It's going to require us to have a self-responsibility with resources. What can be one of the things that happens here is the polarity, second house. There can be a codependency on a partner for resources. And this transit, regardless of how it has been set up between you and a partner, it requires you to recognize self-responsibility with your stuff in some way, somehow. Again, classic scenario, partner asks for a divorce or partner hides the money, you know, cashes out a savings account, puts resources in an offshore account that can't be touched, etc. Part of the self-responsibility is going to be the opportunity to become your own boss, the entrepreneurial energy. It also can be that it's time to learn new talents. The second house Taurus sign is how we create food, clothing, and shelter. And we do that, first of all, by surviving, and then by recognizing there's something we can do in the world that we can exchange for this material stuff. Money is usually the medium of exchange, and that usually comes through job and career. So the second house is where we learn where our natural talents are, what it is we can do that we can barter for resources in some way. These transits, depending upon the age factor here, well, in some degrees, the younger you are, the more there could be opportunities to strike out on your own. The older you are, maybe there's going to be a resource reward. Or maybe you're going to retire from your consensus job and in your quote-unquote retirement, create your own little business that you've always wanted to do to have a little extra income. We can find ourselves all along the financial spectrum with this Saturn in Cap second house transit. And it's making peace with wherever we are in the relativity of our own circumstances. And through that inner peace, inner security, what opportunities to evolve, to grow, to create anew in the material world are being presented. Excuse my burps. From time to time, there will be periods of isolation, because that is a second house phenomena. It is part of the way in which we are going to learn to be self-secure or to address that inner security. So when you feel that compression or depression come with this house transit, it's to be able to go inward with it and ask those why questions. Why do I feel this way? Why do I want to be alone? Why am I being forced to be alone? It can come from either direction. Whatever it is, when we go within, why is this happening? What's it mean? What am I supposed to be learning here? The maturation process is going to be being comfortable with yourself. Again, regardless of that outer world, with or without the resources, with or without that intimate relationship, 8th house polarity. With this second house transit, there will be a reviewing of standards of right, wrong conduct with resources and money. Of course, in this consensus world, it is just, if you don't have your head in the sand and entirely ignore the news in the Western world, and specifically the US, you're realizing there's an extreme of resource money buildup between the haves and the have-nots. And Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter collectively, especially as they get into 2019 and 2020, they are going to create some types of reckoning with that, where the consensus world has to say, wait a minute, it is not right for a country as rich as the US to have 20% of children in poverty, while, we have gold-plated ceilings in homes. So where for you on a personal level are you having to review these standards of conduct around resources and money? Where do you feel guilty about money? Where do you feel guilty about not having money? Individual processes that you will ask questions about, and it will pull you inward to then reflect and review as to how your values need to change around money, which will then realign how you conduct yourself with resources and money to release guilt. In general, It's giving, sharing, and including versus taking, hoarding, and excluding. EA will call these broadly matriarchal principles or natural law principles versus patriarchal distorted principles. And please hear that word distorted, okay? You can be distorted with matriarchal principles. You can indiscriminately give till you have nothing left to pay your own rent. There's some healthy boundaries then that needs to come with that, but just trying to give you some brief examples. And of course, when it comes to these, resources, there's all the survival issues that can get caught up in this, both literal and figurative. The homeless person who, dies on the street because their beliefs and values either won't let them make the effort. They won't put in the effort needed to create what they need. Maybe there's an addiction issue. And so it can be that if you've been a little bit on that second house, quote unquote, lazy side and have not made enough effort, this is where the conduct for you needs to change into making the self-discipline, self-determination efforts. Of course, gender and hormonal pressures will build up here. We're fixed Earth. The second house, the Taurus archetype, is self-sex. And we can have, various gender or hormonal pressures that build up, and they'll need to be addressed in a healthy sense. With this transit, when these types of pressures build up, it is about addressing your own needs. Or 8th house polarity, if you're in relationship, being direct and upfront, clear with your partner about what's changing for you and what needs to be addressed. Maybe you need some healthy role playing sexually in order to heal some inner childhood wounds. So it's going to require a little bit of being aware of how this is building up. Are you having unnecessary emotional explosions because you aren't changing your own gender hormonal issues? In evolutionary astrology, the Cancer Capricorn archetype deals with gender switching. And to have all three of these planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, eventually end up in Capricorn, there will be souls who will be going along and all of a sudden reach an evolutionary awareness that I think I want to shift genders, or I want to relate to the gender the same as me. It can even be that they've been in the same gender relationship and they want to switch to heterosexual. It can go all the different ways. So what we're talking here is, on some of the most bottom lines, a willingness to honor whatever the anima animus, female male issues are going on within us, regardless of our gender. This pot's going to be stirred up a lot over the next 3 years. And again, second house, sexual issues are going to become involved in this some way. In general, the second house, because it's passive fixed Earth, there is a tendency to sit or stuff our issues until the pressure builds up. Does it have to build up until it entirely creates a Plutonian explosion? Does it have to create a Saturnian fissure that just crumbles it into nothingness? How well can you be aware of the pressure buildups, whether it's resources, family, career, gender, sexuality? How well can you be aware of the pressure building up and make the change however it is necessary to do so? When we start looking at the transits with the other planets, as Saturn gets closer and closer to a conjunction with Pluto in the second house, there needs to be an extreme willingness to change as needed, not sit, not stuff. You have to find the courage to initiate movement forward, however it is presenting itself to you in the circumstances of your life, in intuitive inner messages coming through again. You know, Saturn-Pluto wants to hold on. It wants to hold on to the outer world. And this will intensify in the second house. And so the degree of resistance will create the degree of cataclysm. The degree of movement and evolution will decrease the degree of cataclysm. When Jupiter in Scorpio moves through that 12th house, 2018, look deeply at any hidden motives where you are trying to keep yourself in safe routines. In other words, I don't want to shift anything. I like these creature comforts. I like this outer routine. I don't rock my boat. And so what is it that you're afraid of on deep levels and changing? Also is a real good opportunity for healing past life wounds around having the rug ripped out underneath you in regards to resources and career and outer positions in the world. As Jupiter moves into Sag and moves through that first house, which is going to be 2019, you want to find that courage to leap forward with resources and career. You want to trust that intuition and, again, instinctively moving forward. New beginnings, even with these planets in the second house. Jupiter's crossed over the ascendant. It started a brand new 12-year cycle. There's a need for self-honesty. Jupiter Sag is always going to be about self-honesty. In this case, self-honesty about yourself, first house, and with all those resources, Saturn, Pluto, second. And then when Jupiter moves into that second house in 2020, it can create voids and loss to the degree you have refused to change over the last few years. Jupiter doesn't just expand. Jupiter can take it away, just like Saturn, if it's necessary in order to open you up to new. There can be extremes in creating or receiving resources. There could be extremes in losing resources if you've mismanaged or hoarded. Again, all kinds of scenarios, circumstances, and details, you know, that will be coming through for each person who has this transit in their chart. Okay, so I've made it through two of these houses. I'm going to go through the next two. Anything that you perceive I'm missing or not addressing or not dealing with? Going to take another big drink of water here. I'm going to assume silence from Media Monk means move forward. Next, we're going to look at transiting Saturn in Capricorn, moving through the third house. And here, the structure of consciousness is going to mean evolving communications, maturing our communications, becoming more direct Capricorn in communications. will also mean learning to trust our relationship with a changing environment. That need for Capricorn to just have outer security and create these structures conflicts with the mutability of the third house. So we've got to trust that process of life as the world changes. We have to surrender to flexibility in every area of our life. With this Saturn and Pluto transit through the third house, we're going to have, again, build up the structures with career, with position, with family, with relationships, with all of our resources coming from the second. And oh my gosh, now we have to just go with the flow and be flexible. It reminds me of the individual who has the courage to take a commission-based job. And 1 month commissions are great. The next month commissions are awful. And can they learn how to have a balance with the ups and downs of the ever-changing energy with the amount of income that comes in from month to month? That's just one example. Another example could be someone whose children, Cancer, 9th house, fly the coop and decide to go live on the other side of the world, or move to a different city, or decide I'm not going to go into the family business. I have to have my freedom to do something else. It can come at the third house transit as if the outer world is doing all the changes. It's going to take that self-reflection process to recognize it just doesn't happen randomly. Why is that happening to you? How does it reflect back to you? What does it mean needs to change within yourself? Again, an ability to trust the process of change and evolution. It can be juggling more than one job or career in order to get ahead or advance the goals in your life. It can even be you get that pink slip and something, all of a sudden the career that you've had for the last 30 years is taken away. Can you create a new career? Do you have to, work more than one career in order to make ends meet? There has to be a willingness to shift and change however necessary, however circumstances in life are presenting them to you. There needs to be a willingness to learn new talents. Now, the younger you are, that learning new talents could include schooling. Those of you who are very comfortable with reincarnation can recognize that even if you're into your second Saturn return, you're not ready to sit on the couch. You can't afford to sit on the couch. You might need to go back to school at an older age as well. Openness, flexibility. What are the choices being presented in front of me? What are the choices that are realistic for me? What can I do? What can I not do? And then moving along in those directions. You really have to be willing to throw off conditioning factors from the past. This is, relating again to evolving standards of what is right or what is wrong. Because if you're stuck in any old consensus guilt patterns, you're just going to be in that circular loop. And you can get caught up in a structure of consciousness that mentally just loops the same old problem, the same old dead ends, the same old answers. You just get into that same old circular And, you know, the hamster going around the hamster wheel. How fast can I go? But never getting off and taking a breath and you know, looking at it from a different perspective. So yes, there can be some increased need to throw off a lot of the old environmental conditioning factors and to be open to what's changing in your environment. To not automatically sink into judgments about anything and go, well, why do I feel this way? What does that mean? What's changing in my world? This transit is going to bring us opportunities to learn new communication skills and to be quite self-responsible in our communications. What can happen again, both 3rd and 9th, Gemini and Sag archetypes, is this is the polarity of truth versus lies. Both archetypes can be quite honest. Both archetypes can be some good con artists. And so there's going to be a maturation process in how we communicate. And it's going to work best if we have very honest inner communications. We must be careful about playing self-defeatism, a Capricorn archetype as well. You know, nothing's ever going to change for me. It's always going to be this way. Why should I put any effort into it? Well, if I'm really honest with myself, how am I going to change that outer world if I don't change my inner world of how I communicate with myself? That's maturing communications. Inner conversation, outer conversation. There's a need for seeking to understand more. How do I make sense of this changing world or these changing circumstances? How do I understand more about why I'm being asked to be flexible with my career and I move from one position to another? Is it my way out the door? Do I need to make a stand, or do I need to learn something new? What we will have a tendency to do is want to use the language of communicating to control a situation to the degree that it makes us secure. I don't want to change. I don't want to be flexible. Well, I've always done the bookkeeping this way. What do you mean we have to get new software and I have to go through learning an entirely new software program that does things differently than the way that I've done it before? It can, you know, be any type of situation that's presenting itself in your life. Are you trying to argue and control the past to feel secure? Or can you open up to curiosity? Easier said than done with this Capricorn 3rd house transit. And of course, this also includes an ability to be flexible with any familial role. A natural aging process will have us changing old familial, or excuse me, the natural aging process will have us changing any old familial patterns that are necessary. We come from a family of origin that's always done it XYZ. But as we are aging and our natural process of maturing, okay, we're like, why did my family do it that way? I don't want to do it this way. I want to change to something different. Or you can have a family member. You can have spouse come at you. You can have, you know, children. You can have siblings come at you. You can have, you know, you can have siblings coming at you and saying, well, as mom and dad are getting older, here's how I think we should change the resources. Are they wanting to be solely in charge of all the money? so that they can control it. There might be a need to step up, have some honest communications. Ninth house polarity point. Is there something that needs to be done legally from preventing the selfish sibling from controlling it all or manipulating it all through conversations? Again, all these areas with Saturn and Capricorn that have us, needing to change a role. Now, what can easily happen here is family members who are having their own gender and hormonal issues going on, and they come up to you and say, Mom, I think I'm gay. Mom, I think I'd like to go through a transgender security. How about I don't know if you guys, depending on how much TV you want, there's a Netflix show, Frankie and Grace, Jane Fonda and oh gosh, I can't remember the other girl. Their husbands fall in love in their 60s or 70s, and the husbands divorce the two wives and go off in their own relationship together, and all the upsets and changes and flexibility that's required with that. So we can have the older person feel a need to have a change, not just the younger ones. It's all kinds of family roles that are changing. You can even have family members with resources, and one family member or one sibling, decides that they are going to give their money away. They feel too guilty with all that money. They want to live a simple life. They don't need that much money. They want to create a charity. They want to just give it away and be free of the burden that comes with money. Who knows? All over the place. Honor that involution process again, okay? What we have going on with that third house is mutable modality, okay? And so it too, when Gemini in third house gets so overly saturated of what it can take in, it involutes. It just has to throw it off. It just can't take any more. It's got to go be quiet. It's got to just go inward and allow that ninth house intuitive polarity to have a voice. And so when this outer world with this Capricorn third house transit just crumbles, you've got to be able to honor that inward process. You've got to just slow down, sit with it, ponder it. And the third house tendency is to just race ahead, to, again, chicken running around with its head cut off. Do this, do that, do this, do that, without any, sense of understanding why this is happening. We're just going to try something till something sticks. And if we could go inward and take the time to slow down and reflect, then we can come back out with healthy flexibility, healthy actions of how we're going to do this or do that. As we look at Saturn getting closer and closer to Pluto in Capricorn, transiting third house, here again, learning when to surrender to being flexible and learning when to initiate building new realities. There's going to be both that are required here. A letting go and a starting anew. And as we figure out those new ways forward, being able to hold a steady pace, especially if it's requiring us to create a new career or job or to move forward with our resources in some way. What can happen with the third house is if they don't have continual excitement, they can get bored. So they don't follow through long enough to actually create something. So there has to be a steady pace. Now, the good thing is the Saturn-Pluto can help with creating that as we understand and figure out which new ways to move forward are there for us. As Jupiter moves through Scorpio in that first house in 2018, having a deep self-honesty with what motivates us. And also a deep self-honesty with what motivates us in relationships. Are we manipulating in relationships? Are we being manipulated back? Are we being honest with ourselves and others if we're in relationship? Jupiter in Sagittarius moving through that second house means that we have really got to figure out what has value and meaning for us and put our energy out there according to those values and those meanings. If, working 60, 70 hours a week in a corporate job is not what's of value to you, it'll get harder and harder and harder to put your energy into that. And you're going to have to simplify second house into a job that may give you more time, less money. And so how do you live differently? When Jupiter moves into Capricorn and moves through that third house with Saturn and Pluto, honoring our intuition, acting accordingly, versus irrational movements, irrational actions due to our security always being triggered. So if we've really worked with Saturn in Capricorn with that inner security and being, open and flexible as necessary, where necessary, Jupiter can come through and bring through some of those new beginnings and new ideas. If we're not open-minded to that, if we're not honoring Jupiter's intuition, we can create more upsets that force us to be, changing our worlds drastically. The degree of inner security creates the degree of an ability to go with the flow in the outer world. And that's so much what's being learned here with this transit. All right, one more. And I'm going to take another drink. I will also address, probably most of us in astrology do not use whole houses, or whole signs, as this is called. And that means no matter what degree of Libra the ascendant is on, we just reflect it back to 0 degrees with whole signs. All right. Equal houses means that if we have a Libra ascendant at 5 degrees, the second house is 5 Scorpio, the third is 5 Sag. Most of us use unequal houses, and therefore we can create signs that get intercepted entirely in a house, and that sign isn't on a house cusp. That will then reflect in 2 signs, a sign being on 2 houses. So your Jupiter transits may not always fall into those natural houses that I'm describing here as we look at Saturn getting closer and closer to Pluto. When that's the case, you've just got to go back and forth between which one of these 2 Saturn and Cap houses are being reflective most for you. It can also mean that for many of us, we'll have Saturn and Capricorn transiting through one particular house, and it's going to go into the next house during that 3-year transit. You're going to have, I hope, it's my intent, that you've got enough information here as we go through these 12 houses that you can mix and match between these slides and intuit for yourself what some of these maturing lessons are for you with the Saturn transit, with how you're watching your own structure of consciousness evolve through multiple houses and multiple situations and circumstances in your life. When we look at Saturn in Capricorn transiting through the 4th house, the structure of consciousness will be rebirthing inner security and gender roles as home and familial environment requires a maturation process. 4th house going to 10th, Cancer going to Capricorn in the natural zodiac requires a maturation process. So with Capricorn here, we have in essence the child, 4th house Cancer, and the parent, 10th house Capricorn. So you can see there's a push-pull right here because this is the transiting house where the sign is opposite of the natural house it rules. It will bring in a certain element of objectivity because that's what oppositions do in gender. Where am I being childlike? Where do I need to mature? There will be a revolving door between inner and outer security. It is just going to trigger us all over the place. And one of the things to remember about Cancer in the 4th house is, it's emotional self-reliance. And all of those emotions cycle into two distinct cycle between two distinct emotional cycles. There is animation and withdrawal. We're going along in life, something triggers us, we go in upon ourselves, we withdraw emotionally to figure out why, what triggered us, how do I heal, how do I find a new emotional stasis and balance, and then we flip back out into the emotional animation. We want to emote, we want to share, we want to love, and we go back and forth between those two cycles. When we put Capricorn on the 4th house cusp or through the 4th house, the intensity of our inner and outer worlds increases. It becomes extremely important to honor when we're triggered inward and when we're triggered outward. So again, that involution process of passive polarity, Cancer, Capricorn. When we get emotionally triggered, go within, ask why, what's going on, be honest, be mature. I'm responsible for any and all my emotions. No one else is under any circumstances. Doesn't matter who my partner is, if I have one, doesn't matter what my age is, doesn't matter what my family circumstances are, doesn't matter what my job or lack thereof is about. I'm the only one responsible for making myself happy. Why am I triggered? What's it mean? How do I love myself? How do I find my emotional inner peace? How do I breathe? How do I find the ability to emotionally accept myself no matter what? That will give me that courage to go out there and deal with whatever's going on in my world of relationships and career and everything all over the place. If we get too stuck in being emotionally withdrawn, moody, immature, childlike, outer circumstances will trigger and force us to go outward. It'll force us to go out there and show up for the job in order to pay the rent or eat food. There will be family situations that will force us to show up and inwardly, outwardly relate to family members to change all those old conditioning factors of our family, to change all those outworn standards of right, wrong conduct, to stand up to conditioned familial guilt and say, I don't buy this anymore. So it is really being able to go just like the moon does, emotionally flowing in and out, up and down, fast and slow. When we are asked to go inward, it's also about looking at all of our own internal dynamics. That outer world isn't random. There isn't a perfect old man sitting on a cloud trying to determine how to beat us up. There's a rhyme and a reason. There is karma dharma. So if we, when we're triggered inward, can really reflect on our own inner dynamics of why we act the way we act, it can help us change that self-image, find the courage to go out there to meet that world. It can help us change the reality of our world. It can really help us find inward security, no matter what it is out there. And it can really help us learn how to be happy, Cancer, with our careers, 10th house, regardless of how big or small or what our position is. If we're working to do this and creating, again, a positive self-image, we can really shift career opportunities with this transit. We can also find that courage to get out there into the world, however necessary. Doesn't mean that for everyone who has Saturn and Capricorn transiting the 4th house that we've got to go out there and get a career. But it is going to ask us to be self-determined instead of being blown around by the emotional winds of everyone else. That self-determination, self-discipline, self-responsibility, all those maturing words of growing up is really what this is going to be about with this transit. Capricorn says you must emotionally grow up and mature. Then you can really have peace in your inner world and your outer world. And of course, here too, all of our familial conditioning factors will come up and be in our face even more than the other house transits because we have that polarity going on. Capricorn in the 4th house, Cancer in the 10th. The positive is we can get objectivity around all those familial conditionings. Somehow, some way, there's going to be an evolution in balancing our own inner anima, animus, our own, male, female energy, regardless of what gender we are. We're going to be asked to throw off old standards of right, wrong conduct on gender patterns. Maybe we have old past life memories of being persecuted for a lifetime in which we were homosexual. And we're perfectly fine in a heterosexual relationship this time. But we're so triggered at the outrageousness of the consensus world treating LGBT people that way. And, emotional evolution for us is going to be Capricorn going out there into the world and volunteering in the LGBT community. hetero standing up for homo. It can go all kinds of different ways. The thing of it is throwing off old limited Capricorn standards. From the broader perspective of evolutionary astrology, the whole evolutionary lesson of homosexuality is learning to love a soul first, a body second. And from the perspective of reincarnation, it allows us to have a broader understanding of why we have masculine women and feminine men. It can be a soul who's just flipped genders after being a series of lifetimes in the opposite gender. The example is a female who's had many, many lifetimes as male. She can come in as the real masculine female. Oh, and if there's no concept of reincarnation, well, I'm the wrong gender. I need to be the other one. Yes, to whatever degree that gives you comfort. However, from the perspective of reincarnation, you've outworn the lessons to learn as a male. It's now time to find the courage to address all of the lessons as a female. Yes, you can have your inner male courage, but can you access that inner strength from a feminine perspective? There's all kinds of little details, but you get the broad examples of what I'm trying to say here. And again, this doesn't mean if you have this Saturn and Cap transit through the 4th house, you're going to go changing genders. If it's what's emerging out of you, great. But it can just be that it's happening when you're family and someone else is totally upset. And how are you there to help people, family members, have some maturing understanding of it? How can you, throw off these old family patterns? How can you be an advocate for letting every family member operate anima animus as that family member feels natural to do so? That's going to be one of the real gifts and lessons of this house transit. Standing up for all souls to live their inner female male as it feels best for them to do so in the current moment. And then giving them a backdrop of where this is coming from and how it's setting up evolution. And of course, then making that effort to emotionally mature and accept complete self-responsibility for oneself and whatever the circumstances are in your world, your life. That will allow for a healthy self-image that is separate from the outer world, not dependent upon it. It allows us to recognize what our necessary roles are in the outer world. It's not about cocooning 100%. And it will allow for self-responsibility with resources. When we are emotionally self-accepting, then we can do whatever it's necessary to provide for ourselves and or provide for our family with whatever the circumstances require. It can allow for the house husband who stays home with the children while the wife goes out into the world and works. Whatever the details are. As Saturn gets closer and closer to Pluto in Capricorn through the 4th house, that outer world is only going to be as good as we are at honoring our emotional inner world. Again, as they get closer and closer to their conjunction, if you find yourself in that involution, decompression, depression, it's not just going to happen randomly. It's there for a reason. Ask why, Pluto. Why? Why? Why is this happening? What needs to change in my world? It is a cardinal modality here. It's a double cardinal modality. So what am I to initiate as I figure things out on an inner basis? Oh, I forgot to put my houses in here. I'm going to make a note of this so that I go through and get 4th, 3rd, 2nd. As we look at Jupiter in Scorpio moving through the 2nd house, 2018, we need to watch for a tendency to remain stuck in old emotional wounds and patterns. If so, it's going to create an emotional combustion to get us beyond the 2nd house inertia. As Jupiter moves through Sagittarius in that 3rd house, we want to look for an ability to deeply process information rather than glossing over and avoiding any emotional self-reflections. We're going to coast the surface, or we're going to go deeply intuitive. As Jupiter moves then through Capricorn and into the 4th house in 2020, everything we've just talked about will come up again, and it will magnify even more, and it will add on one more planet in Capricorn that says it's time to mature in how you balance your inner and outer worlds. So I added on, or included, as I have in the previous webinars, these questions in general for Saturn in Capricorn. What are my deepest fears, and how do I address them? How do I unconditionally love myself? Cancer polarity. How do I balance my inner male and female? How are my familial relationships evolving? Where do I need to accept complete and utter self-responsibility for any and all circumstances in my life? What are my emerging career goals and desires? What changes do I need to make with my resources? All right, that is my material for tonight. I'm just going to remind you, if you're interested, my forecast for 2018 will be Wednesday, January 3rd of 2018. And of course, this Wednesday, we'll look at Saturn in Capricorn through houses 5 through 8. And we'll look at Saturn in Capricorn through houses 9 through 12, a week from tonight, Monday, December 18th. Let me just check in. Any questions, comments, Leroy?
No, the board's been relatively quiet and interacting with a half a dozen people on and off, but nothing on the board currently. But I thought with all this Capricorn stuff, it'd be a good time just to throw in a promo on our Capricorn coupon code for any segment of our course materials. Remember, the DVDs and materials, or the DVDs and materials combination with the digital, are all on sale through January 18th. That's a Capricorn coupon code. Apply that at checkout and save 25% off. And everybody's saying thanks for the information, Kim. So the board is very grateful.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to interact with you. And I will see all of you in 48 hours. Well, 46 hours. Good night, everyone.